Okay, shoot. Yes, please.
Sins. There are sins that make you like demons.
Yeah.
Can you name a few?
Yeah. Anger's a funny one, because anger can make you like an animal and like a demon, and there are different types of anger. So anger is a kind of transition. It's sort of on the border between the two, because obviously a dog can growl. We know that animals get angry, but they tend to get angry for self-defense in a kind of instinctual way. We can get angry for reasons that have nothing to do with self-defense whatsoever. We can get angry because we like to be angry. We can get angry because we're bored, and it rouses us up. And people can try to make you angry in order to rouse you up. And that has nothing to do with defending yourself. Anger can also be what it usually is. Some would say what it always is in a human being. Fear. Actually, it's that in the dog too. And we can concoct fears of things that aren't even threatening us. We can be afraid of a past that doesn't even exist because it's the past, or a future that doesn't even exist because it's the future. And we can rob ourselves of the present by a kind of demonic fear. And because we're too afraid or too arrogant to admit that we're afraid, because we think we're men and men don't get afraid, women cry but men don't cry and men don't get afraid, so we can turn it into anger. Because anger can lead to violence, and that makes us men feel more masculine if we're really young and really primitive. And so anger is a transition between, it's an animal-like passion, but it has a distinctively demonic dimension when human beings experience it. How about greed? Different fathers, different ascetical writers will classify things differently. Don't look for consistency in the Orthodox Church, it's a lie. Greed depends very much on possessions, and animals don't have possessions. They have instincts, and they will fight over their food if some other animal tries to steal it, but not because the other animal has food that it doesn't want, but the other animal has the food. It doesn't even actually want the food. We want all sorts of things. We're greedy for things that we don't actually want, but someone else has it. So that becomes like a demonic phenomenon in which the malice of the demon starts to infect us. But mostly there are things that are much subtler. Just as pietism in various forms, I was very direct because I wanted you to remember, but there are subtle and subtle and subtle forms of pietism. Remember when my bishops stood right here and said that we bishops and priests have a great passion?
Yes, I do.
You were here. And the great passion is we are show-offs. We are actors. Sister Vassal and I had the same conversation. She knows what I'm talking about. People who perform in public, even if they perform for the glory of God, we have a passion called vainglory. Sometimes it's called vanity, but that's come to mean something different in English. Vainglory means basically, I am very insecure. I am extremely shy and insecure, like all actors, and I need to be loved. And I want you to love me by applauding and by paying attention and things. And this is subtle because it's not the most destructive of these sort of higher passions, but it can be. It's really subtle. The one thing that saves those of us afflicted with vainglory is at least we need you. You need an audience. You need someone to pay attention. Which leads me to the primary demonic passion known as pride. A lot of people think vainglory is pride. Vainglory isn't pride because vainglory needs an audience. Pride doesn't need anything. And it's demonic because it has nothing whatsoever inherently to do with animal impulses or the body or anything. It's entirely a prison, self-enclosed. Pride doesn't need God. Pride doesn't need you. Pride is just pride. Pride is the universe is me, whatever I am at that moment, or whatever I think I am. So I'm entirely enclosed in a prison in myself, and there's no way I can possibly grow anywhere. That is very demonic because, remember, demons are in prison. The evil one is in a prison. And demons and the foremost liar, the evil one, are angry because they're imprisoned, and they're imprisoned by something in themselves. So that's basically demonic passions. You can't give them in a simple form like animal passions.
No.
Yes, please. Yes.
So obviously in there you've mentioned quite a few things, let's say Protestant faiths, who a lot of them would see us as the heretical church. I touched on this earlier with you.
Yeah.
Now the other question I've thought of is what reference can I give if somebody sort of wants to, let's say, Bible bash me, to give a phrase that I hate quite a lot. What point of reference can I give them to show them that they maybe they're looking in the wrong place?
You want to memorize a whole chapter of a Bible and really impress those Protestants? No, I don't recommend it unless you're a very good actor and you're used to committing huge scripts. But if you want to look in a chapter that has a lot of one-liners, if that's it, Matthew 23. Because Christ is lambasting the Pharisees. And in no uncertain terms. That's where serpents and brood of vipers and things. But he also is very specific. Like, you do this and you think that you are without sin, and he gives examples. So you can get a lot of that from Matthew 23, and you can always use Luke 18. You can use Luke. Nicholas, are you going to assist me? Yeah. You can use Luke 18 because at the end of Luke 18, praying with himself, toward himself. Basically, if you want to do an easy thing, take a concordance. You know what a concordance is. It guides you to verses in the Bible, word search. You can even do it in Google. Google can turn into a concordance. And put in Pharisees, and then look for the reference in the Gospels. Because there is remember, this isn't even classical Protestantism. This isn't Luther and Calvin Protestantism. This is a very specific, perennial, transcultural phenomenon. But when you find Protestants who are like this, there is plenty of evidence in the Bible. One little anecdote very briefly, just to answer your question with an illustration. I have a parishioner who is born in Romania but grew up in the United States. And she grew up in the Midwest, part of the United States where there's a lot of this. A lot of this. Canadian prairies too, a lot of this. And so she's Orthodox, she's baptized, chrismated, she's very sincere, she comes to the Divine Liturgy, comes to communion, comes to confession more often than I'm able to hear the confessions. She's very sincere and devout, but she's very influenced by this in its Protestant form. And she's very influenced by the idea that Christianity means the Ten Commandments. I sort of said, well, Christianity includes the Ten Commandments, but by the way, the Ten Commandments come from the book of Exodus, not from the Gospels. What about the Beatitudes? How do we understand the Ten Commandments? We're not Jews. Even the Jews have commentary to understand the Ten Commandments. But a very simple, rule-oriented pietism. And I once had to remind her when she was tormenting herself with guilt, as she always does, over all sorts of things, because she's fairly young and influenced by this sort of, you better keep the rules or else, caricature of Christianity. I remind her of what Christ says to the Pharisees each time one of them conspicuously keeps the rules, but especially when someone who doesn't keep the rules is there. A sinful woman wetting the feet of Christ. Simon says, if he were really a prophet, he would know what kind of dirty woman that is. Classic pietism. If someone says that they live by the gospel, throw the gospel in their face. And by the way, about heresy and idolatry and such like this, ask one of these sola scriptura Protestants if they worship according to the law of God in Exodus chapters 25 to 30. Ask them where electric guitars are found in the Bible. Ask them where hand clapping and no incense and no robes are found in the worship explicitly authorized by God. Don't get into the debate about justification and such, because that's not why we worship. We worship because God commands us to worship, and God commands us to worship to give glory to God, because we live by giving glory to God. So, again, when debating with anybody outside the church, or indeed within the church, as I just pointed out, know your weapons. Yes, Isaac.
Even though I agree with everything that you've just said, and
I knew what was coming.
and not that I would admit otherwise, but it's true. I do agree with everything you just said, and I oppose everything you just opposed. In theory, yet I find myself sometimes falling into the pietism. Just to give one, and other virulent isms that can infect you. Just to give one example, going to church. Sometimes I don't know if I'm going to church because I want to be at church or or out of a sense of obligation, not to God, not even to myself, but to some obscure set of principles. Because I don't want to appear a certain way by not appearing. Because I don't want to disappoint my parish priest, because I don't want to disappoint my fellow parishioners. And I don't know, and I don't know when I'm at my weakest, when I say, screw it, I'm going to stay in bed on a cold winter day, or screw it, I'll go because I have to. How do you slap yourself out of that?
You don't slap yourself. That's self-abuse, and not what the Latin says. I had to convey something very complex this morning, so I was very emphatic and very shorthand, because we don't have all of eternity, and I have to get to the next conference. But
we don't.
This is a perennial temptation across cultures and religions, as I just pointed out. And I said every one of us is infected by it. We all have this, because from another point of view, isn't this judgment? Isn't an aspect of it just judgment? Judgmental towards yourself, and therefore judgmental towards everyone else, judgmental towards everyone else, and therefore judgmental towards yourself. We all get in that situation. You think priests and bishops and monastics and such don't have that? I'm not the healthiest person. I have so many aches and pains. I'm a very grouchy, irritable person. And I sleep long hours because of my asthma. Part of the reason I was so asthmatic today is that I'm not used to getting up this early and going to bed that early. And because I love all of you and I like to be with you, I stay up too late and then I get up too early. So we all have constant mornings in which I just want to stay in bed. I'm so exhausted. I don't even care. And for me, there were 5 years or so, I don't know how much, in which I just didn't go to church. I wasn't a priest yet. That would have had consequences, especially because I don't have a deacon or assistant priest at this point, so I don't quite have that leisure. But when I was around your age, sometime in my 20s, I said, screw it, because I hate hypocrisy. And I hate my own hypocrisy, and I hate other people's hypocrisy, and I hate to be drowning in that poisonous sea known as hypocrisy. And I wanted the real thing, and I couldn't find the real thing. I couldn't find it in myself or anyone else. So I wasn't going to go through the motions and pretend. So I certainly didn't pray. Not just not going to church, I certainly didn't pray. But I really like prayer robes, homposynia. Here's a fancy one made in Greece, which is white and red. And because part of my vainglory, and because I'm a child and I like toys, I really like prayer robes. And somehow, sometimes I found myself sort of fingering the prayer robe, even though I wasn't saying the prayer. I'm hinting at something subtle, more subtle than slapping yourself. There's a hunger in you that's even in an atheist. And it's just a question, not like you always know how to satisfy the hunger and the atheist never does. It's not like that. It's more complicated than that. There's a hunger in a human being that wants God, even when that human being has no idea that there is God. And they mistake other things. But what they want is God, and you can tell because you get the other thing and it still leaves you hungry. It's a classic situation with saints, not just ascetical saints. I indulge every conceivable passion. My God, I'm older than Sister Vasa. I'm a child of the 60s. What passion have I not exhausted? And if you indulge that many passions in that ready sequence, you get awfully tired and you get awfully bored. And the hunger just gnaws because nothing will satisfy it. But I hated hypocrisy, and so I just rejected the whole thing for some period of years. And then suddenly, I wanted it again because I saw the familiar thing in a different way. Nothing had changed. The words of the prayers hadn't changed, and the temple hadn't changed. Nothing external had changed. Suddenly, I just woke up, and I saw these same things that I saw as meaningless, and they were full of meaning. Thank God for that time in my life. Thank God for that desert, if you will, because it cleared my eyes of the film. I want to use an analogy, and I hope you get this in terms of how do you overcome your not caring and just going for the sake of going, and then judging yourself because you're going for the sake of going, and then not going because you judge yourself for the sake. I know. It's said of the music of Tchaikovsky that people who know very little about music and people who know a great deal about music appreciate him. And people who know just a little more about music despise him. Because Tchaikovsky is very emotional and overt and popular and such. And so is very attractive to people who have an immediate emotional reaction to music. All Russian 19th century music tends to have these qualities. And then you learn a little more about music and say, oh, this sentimental stuff. I'm going in for Bach. I'm going to Rameau or something like this because they're more sophisticated mathematical. And then, or Mozart. And then you learn a lot more about music and the structures of music, and you come to appreciate the subtlety in Tchaikovsky that you didn't hear before. See what I mean? Tchaikovsky hasn't changed, but you have. And maybe you needed that period when you would refuse to listen to Tchaikovsky to rediscover him.
Yeah.
I'm a great believer. I won't going to say in taking breaks. Don't take breaks. I want you in church. But I'm a great believer in taking internal breaks. Probably because I rest much too little. I tend to go to bed only when I collapse. I believe in taking kind of breaks from your own notion of your own religiosity. Fasting from your own religiosity. I also believe it's very helpful to be unsentimental about your faith and to realize you're not always going to be there. Your body is often going to be there. You think every one of us who consecrates the most holy, the precious body and blood is always there? Well, I find, and I will share with all of you as a priest, I find that sometimes I begin the divine liturgy and I would rather be anywhere else. And life is so stale, and I'm so tired, and I'm sweaty, and my head aches, and my arthritis is bothering me, and I have an asthma attack. I'd rather be anywhere else. But I stay because I remember that there's something. I remember something. Maybe in the back of my head, in that condition, I remember something. And I find it because I allowed myself to remember. Again, these things cannot be simplified because these are deep spiritual experiences, and 20 cannot hear what 40 has to say.
To say, but that's a really good saying.
A very good saying.
I think
Yes,
we have
please.
time for one or
We
two
have
more
one or
questions.
two? Okay, Vanilla.
It's a kind of similar question. How do we stop ourselves from taking off the list, but
I'm ticking
still,
the list.
yes, just we like a shopping list.
Yeah. I know what list
So,
it
Yeah,
is.
and shopping.
like in everyday daily life,
Yeah.
how do we get out of that?
I'm going to give you an honest answer, and therefore it's not going to be a simple answer.
I don't know how we do.
Because usually honest answers are not simple answers about these things. This is what results from
But
living on simple answers. It's something that came up in a lot of questions yesterday. It was implicit. It's a kind of how-to that's very difficult to answer in the form it's asked. And that's the reason I read that thing from Booth Tarkington's The Magnificent Ambersons about 20 and 40. Not that you know nothing because you're in your 20s. You probably know a lot more that I've forgotten. But it's symbolic. You have to have certain experiences to understand certain things, and you have to have certain experiences to alter certain behaviors. And you can't just alter the behavior genuinely by just forcing yourself to alter the behavior, because you'll drive out the one demon and the 7 demons will come in, just like that quotation. You experience certain things in life and you understand certain things. A list is judgment. You're first judging yourself, but then that opens up all sorts of things, because what is the self you're judging? And you become proud of all those tick marks. And then you notice other people don't have the tick marks. I thank thee, O God, that I am not like other men. Well, I once comforted a young 20-something brother seminarian back in St. Egan's who had fallen into a fleshly sin. A big one. Not every day. And he was so young and sensitive, and I was about 13 years older because I went to seminary at 33. And he was very close to a kind of spiritual despair about himself because of this sin. And it was a big sin because it has big impacts on people if you're at all sensitive. And he had already gone to confession. And he told me, because you have the right to tell what you said in confession, we don't, but you do. He told me, Father Keegan said it's not that big a deal. Yes, he understands it has a big impact, but don't worry, torment yourself. But he was still tormented. And I was a reader, I wasn't a confessor. So he came to me, and I said, never again in your life, if you live to 100, will you be able to say, I thank thee, O God, that I am not like other men. And he understood. Now he is a priest with 7 children and a very prosperous parish, as they often are in parts of the U.S. And Father Michael wants to come to the UK to do a doctorate if he could figure out what to do with his wife and children, and his parish. But anyway, he was very grateful that all I said is, you will never again be able to say, I thank you, O God, that I am not like other men.
Amen.
How do you learn humility? We're really talking about humility here, because this is one of the subtlest and most poisonous forms of pride, because you figure God wants you to be proud in that way. You learn humility not by saying, oh, I'm a terrible person, oh, please kick me in the nose, please kick my teeth out, I'm a terrible person, God hates me, I'm a worm, God wants to squish me. That's paganism. That's paganism. You're not worshipping God if you think that's humility. Because it's all about you. Praying towards yourself. Humility comes through the back door to the extent that we ever receive the grace of humility. It comes through the back door because I know how weak I am. And I can't hide from it anymore. And that's the sense in which I'm answering you. How do you stop ticking the list? Because you've torn away the list and thrown it away long ago, because you know that there's no point. Even if you kept everything on that list, you would be no better off than if you kept nothing on it, when it really comes down to it. How can you be so arrogant as to buy God with your virtues? And when life experience teaches you that, it just stops. And then if you become very angry about it, partly it's because, like everybody else, you've fallen into the temptation. So, no easy answers, because 20 has to become 40 spiritually to find out.
And it will very soon.
Not necessarily.
And it could.
One more question, maybe? Yes, Sasha.
I'm trying to be quick. One thing to echo what Isaac said. One thing that is that church for me was a spiritual house, and I had the keys. I could go or not go. It was not a compulsory thing. So when I was too lazy, when I had a long night and I couldn't wake up, I didn't have, and I still don't, well, no one will put pressure on me, and I won't be like, you must, you have, maybe it's wrong, but I don't want to pretend. I don't want to, the thing I'm afraid of is when my shame, my sins, make me fear to go.
Yeah.
Because then I think, well, probably it's exactly the point of the sin. It takes it. It gives me the feeling that I can't come to God because I'm not worthy, and of course I'm not worthy. Even when I don't make shameful sins, in any case, I can never be worthy. But so that's one thing I wanted to react to, well, I'm worried about vainglory, and you mentioned at the beginning the masks. In confession, I have to drop the conscious mask, but how do I do with the part of the mask I don't know of myself? And as much as I love talking, or precisely because I love talking, how do I keep quiet and make room for God?
When you find out, you tell me. No, the earlier point you made, Sasha, is very, very practical and very disturbing, because you know the morning prayer of Father Sophrony of Essex that speaks of, among other things, save me from my secret sins. He doesn't start tormenting himself by imagining what the secret sins are. You can go insane that way. How in God's name, literally, can you know your unconscious sins if they're unconscious?
Exactly.
So you can fall into a disease which the Latins call scruples, which means you worry constantly about sins that you're not aware of. You worry constantly that you're damned by some secret thing, and God is there behind the curtain with the pitchfork.
I can trick myself.
You can trick yourself by worrying so much about sins you're not even aware of, and you can trick yourself out of that by confessing that you obviously commit sins you're not aware of. Lord, have mercy.
You have the answer, Lord have mercy.
When I divert, force me back to the path of salvation.
And he's telling God, not himself. And that is absolutely crucial.
You can do that.
God is a little more powerful than you are. And God has a slightly greater perspective on you than you do. And God has a slightly greater authority than you do.
If you want
So
to.
what helps me is to know, you know that priests cannot abstain from the Eucharist that they offer. You can. You have a luxury as laity. You can not receive communion at a divine liturgy of your own free will. I don't really recommend you get into that habit, but you can do so. But we can't. We don't have that luxury. The bishop or priest who consecrates must receive, or technically be defrauded. And so every one of us faces something like this. Every Sunday that we're in a certain mood, I do mean mood. It's not an objective spiritual state I'm talking about. It's a mood. It's psychological. Because you're accusing yourself and you don't even know what you're accusing yourself of. Fundamentally, you know that you're unworthy and you're trying to find reasons that you're unworthy. See what's happening in your mind? The evil one, if you want to put it that way, is using your own self-doubt to concoct a problem which may not even exist. That's how worry and anxiety and these things often work. So I just say, I remember what the word mercy means and why that is the most common word in all of our divine services. And of course, I recently watched a YouTube video from the United States, which was downright depressing, because the poor young girl about your age was saying, oh, well, the Orthodox Church is fine, but it's awfully morbid. And I thought, morbid? And I said, because
Yeah,
they're always
I saw-
asking for mercy.
I saw
They're
that
always
video.
asking God not to smash them. They're always asking God for mercy. Please, God, have mercy. Don't kick my teeth in. Please, God, don't zap me. Don't throw me in the dungeon.
I saw
And
that
I
video,
thought,
it was
how
depressing.
utterly sad that someone misinterprets mercy. It's exactly the opposite. It's exactly the opposite. Mercy isn't not punishing you. Mercy is loving you. Mercy is loving you even if you hate it. Mercy is loving you no matter what. And that's why thinking
I
of
saw
the
that
word
video, it
mercy
was depressing.
rescues me from the temptation of scruples. Just being aware there is no way I can possibly live up to that. So I stop trying. And the fact that our prayers and our services are fixed, that there's a form, and that form is not going to go away. Only I'm going to go away. The form isn't. I can fall back upon it, and suddenly if I listen to my own priest prayers that I'm saying, I say them all out loud in my parish, so I have to listen to them. And they're all about, I am the least worthy of all, because I'm not even just receiving the precious gifts, I'm actually consecrating them. I'm right up there. The spotlight is on me. And they're constant ways that Basil the Great and John Chrysostom, all the sources of the prayers, enable us priests to cope with the horrific fact of being priests. The fact that we actually have to be in a kind of judgment that you're spared. So we all have these coping devices, and again, rounding up, my simple answer is trust in God. And the only way you find out how to trust in God is finding out how little you can trust in yourself.
Yeah,
And you find that out from experience.
you definitely
And the
lied
more
about it.
experience that you have, that the less you can trust in yourself. Well, you're either going to despair, trust in nobody, or you're going to trust in God. And it helps to trust in God if He's right in front of you. And you can actually see Him in the ways He has made available to you because of your weakness and His strength. I think time is up, and I thank you for your attention and questions.